Hey there, Yurii here, and welcome to the Community ROI podcast. Here, senior community experts, founders, and C-level managers tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about how a community impacts business growth. By listening to these conversations, you'll get actionable steps on how to connect community goals with business goals to skyrocket business growth while still bringing extreme value to community members. And my guest is Katie Ryser, a community business and operations expert who thrives on bringing people together and is the go-to person for connecting the dots between what a business wants to achieve and how to make it happen. So, welcome, Katie.
Thank you, Yurii. And I think the sentiment is across the board with your podcast. Thanks for making me sound so good. I appreciate it.
That's how it is. That's how I see you, that's who you are. So just deal with it. Sorry, but
Okay.
just deal
I'll
with it.
just accept it and move on. Thank you.
Let's start with the first question. So, what's your definition of a community goal?
Okay, so this is a hair controversial, but in my opinion, a community goal is not significantly different from another goal. It's just focused on what you're doing in community. So it needs to be focused on the variables that you can control as a community builder, but you absolutely have to be able to communicate how your community goal ladders up to your team and even corporate OKRs. So your objectives and key results, right? So while it might be something that you control, it's not necessarily any different than anything else. You should probably be using SMART framework so that it's specific and measurable and time bound and all of that good stuff. And you just need to make sure that there is that connection across the board. It doesn't need to be that complex. It doesn't need to be something that you have strife over or something that you are overthinking. But just think of it like, what do I control and how can that move the business forward?
So basically, it's your task to connect community goals. I mean, as a community expert, to connect community goals with business goals, or are you working with someone else on making it happen?
So you need to come up with what you think that you can move forward. You need to come up with what the variables that you know that you can achieve within community. But then you need to look like what has my company said is their main objective? How does community support? How can we help? How can we move into that? If it's something, there's so many things depending on the size of your business, which I've worked with all different sizes of businesses. So, if you're sitting within marketing, is it something about, you know, how many people are attending an event? If you're providing content, how's that content performing? How does that ladder up to the overall goals? So a community goal for me, it's just any other goal that sits within wherever you are working. And in this case, in this context, we're talking community.
Okay, so what is one goal of the community you are working with at the moment or worked before that inspires you the most?
Hands down, I'm going to say anything that involves engagement with community members. So any metric that we can prove that our work on community and engaging in that area is impacting the business as we're impacting people is going to be my favorite, right? Like there's so many, I another controversial take, right? Like a big part of my job is analyzing and doing a lot of math. Um, and that is absolutely necessary. It's profitable. It's a thing that you must do, whether you like it or not. But at the end of the day, when we can connect those dots and say, this person was involved in community, they are on our leaderboard, they are doing all of the things, they are coming to events, they are participating in our forums. And because of that, they are moving our business, our overall business forward because we know how impactful that can be. So once you can connect all of those dots and see that change in your business and in your company. That's the most inspiring thing to me.
What information do you need and who do you need to work with to connect these dots? Why I'm asking? Because
Mhm.
sometimes the hardest problem of community builders and overall connecting community with business is that there is no connection in database of people and if there are community members. So you just cannot see who are from
Oh,
all the database of clients are community members. And it's like, and sometimes I'm talking to clients like, you have to have this. And they're like, no, we can't do this. How will you track? Like,
yeah.
and then like, so who do you work with? Like, and what information do you need to connect these dots?
So that is such a huge paradox, I think, in community. And part of it comes from the fact that I think many community teams are run as a startup, and that's great. But figuring out how to plug in across the business, I mean, when I look at community, I see a big web, right? Like there's all sorts of strings going all different directions. So how are you pulling it all together? So when you're looking at that measurement, you need to figure out, first of all, what resources are available in your organization. You know, if you're in a smaller organization, it's going to be um, significantly different from when you're in a larger organization. When you're in a larger organization, do you have resourcing? And so it's always that paradox, right? So one of the things that I would say, I would look at your platform. What are you using and what are the capabilities there? Is there something built in? Is there an integration that you can deploy in your business that will help you connect that dot? Otherwise, you're probably going to have to get some scrappy analytics going. So whether or not you have resources for that, do you have someone who already has that skill set? Do you have someone who could have that, who could build that skill set, who already has a mind frame that looks at data? Now, where it gets hard is connecting all of those pieces, right? Because we all know that, especially in tech, there's like this drastically huge realm of tech stack. And sometimes they talk to each other and sometimes they do not.
Yeah.
So where can you find that overlap? And truly, like if we are talking ROI, which we are, this probably should be priority number one,
Yeah,
even
you
if it is
know,
one part.
yeah, sorry, but you have to do this no matter what. And something that I've recently found that when you have data from different tools, you don't always need a technical person, tech guy,
Mhm.
to do this. Sometimes it's just enough to go to ChatGPT and like, hey, I have this information in HubSpot and I have this information in Slack.
Mhm.
What is the easiest way I can connect this data? And
Right.
sometimes it's like easy, but yeah, I know that sometimes you have to go through all the hell of the process of creating tasks, creating tickets, asking for
Mhm.
that, but sorry,
Partnering with your
unfortunately,
IT department,
yeah, I feel
explaining why it helps.
becoming a part of them at some
Yeah.
moment because otherwise. Okay, so engagement, how does engagement align with business goals?
So that's always the tricky one, right? We kind of already talked about it, but it's hard to quantify human connection with business goals. So things that I would look at are if you have an event, like a community specific event, how many people attended? Were there leads generated? Are you able to discover if those people, maybe purchased a product, if they renewed? Renewals are another good thing. Like there are things that you can correlate to that activity. And just an aside, I mean, the reason I'm so passionate about that particular area is because I am that person.
Mhm.
I can talk about that. I'm an Asana ambassador. I joined that program in 2020, and it was 100% my involvement in the community and the engagement and the opportunities that they presented to me that caused me to take that business with me to a couple of other roles, right? And so it was this way that their community was able to answer all my questions, provide different
Mm.
resources. I was a nonprofit at the time, so they had special resources for nonprofits, which I think anyone who's worked in nonprofit knows how challenging that can be because you do have truly limited resources.
Yeah.
They provided so much free and accessible education. And on a professional level, what they taught me without meaning to is how to articulate things in a different way because my background is a pretty formalized project management, like the big PMI, Project Management Institute, all of that stuff. And so I know how to speak that language very, very well. But when you're working with different people from different backgrounds, that language can be very difficult. So they taught me on accident, just through observation, how to distill that language down to something that was very accessible. And so I know that community engagement is so huge, is so helpful, even from a person who's just trying to learn how to use a particular system, because I've done it. I've been that person. And so for me, that's where it comes from. This has impacted my career in many ways, not just in like using Asana, but just in general. It taught me how to do things better. And so that's where I say that engagement is the best, right? Like I could, if I wanted to, probably tell you how much money I made for them. And that's what we all want to do, right? Like, I mean, it's horrible to kind of distill it down to we want to make money, but at the same time, that's how you keep your job.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like every part of the company has to bring business values because even though I have this joke when people asking me like, "What do you do?" I'm saying that I'm talking to people, having fun, and getting paid for that. It's not the full truth. Sorry, but yeah, it's not the full. It's like more.
We all have to we have to find a way to make a living that lights us up, right?
Exactly,
We
exactly.
all have to work.
So sometimes there is engagement for the sake of engagement. So engagement without any goals. And
Mhm.
I wonder what types of engagement, like what steps do you do? How do you engage? How do you engage community members to ensure that it's not just engagement for the sake of engagement, but that it still works for reaching business goals?
Yeah, that is a tough one. So I think part of it is just making sure that you're continuing to communicate. And it's hard because I think in community, we tend to get really focused on doing things and we want to report out and said, I did X, Y, and Z without correlating, and this is how we move forward. And I see that a lot. So I've even talked to not a couple of people. I've actually taught on the difference between a tangible and an intangible deliverable versus a business goal. So understanding that doing things for the sake of doing things
Hmm.
may not always be the right path and that we can cut activities that aren't profitable to the customer or the business. So, what I would say, engagement for engagement, you have to really, really take a look. Like, what is actually happening with that engagement? That's where I have instituted monthly business reviews, things like that, where we're constantly taking a look and constantly evaluating what is actually happening. Are we spending time on things that aren't valuable to ourselves or the business, and how can we move that forward? I've done that at several roles. It's just part of how I feel that the continuous reevaluation is helpful. So I would say that it's hard to connect those dots, but you can see it once you're able to connect the systems and get an idea of how you're going to measure community activity versus account health. Then you can start to say, and this person was and this person was involved here, and we have seen X, Y, and Z happen with their account health. That's where you really need to get to. Um,
Hmm.
and it's not an easy equation, right? That's a hard one.
Is there anything easy in the community? Like,
No,
I mean, not on the surface. On the surface, it's easy and shiny and everyone's happy, but there is always things that go in down deeper.
right,
That's exactly why we are talking about these things. And
right.
what teams do you work with when you are building a community? And also, how does a community impact them?
Hmm. Well, it's almost every single team. If we go back to that web analogy, right? We're the pieces, we're the strings in between. So I would say you've got to engage, and it depends on your timing, right? Like not all at once. My goodness, that's most community teams are small.
Mm,
If you're an established community, you might have a very large team, but I don't. My observation across the industry is that most community teams are very small. So you'd really want to prioritize. I said priority number one, you're probably going to have to work with IT. IT.
mm,
Full stop. Sorry. Or not sorry. I mean, they're wonderful. It's just, sometimes we don't want to have those conversations, those very technical conversations. And unfortunately, we have to. That's part of our job. You're going to want to engage with sales for sure, because they are the ones who hold the customer. They likely hold that customer relationship before you even got there. So you need to make sure that you're engaging with them.
mm.
Post sales or your customer success, just depending. I'm speaking from these are teams that you might have. Not everyone's going to have every single one of these teams.
Yeah.
You're going to want to engage with, if you have a content team, if you have a social media team, how do you work with them? You are going to want to engage with, gosh, how many other teams? Um,
Just call every team and like,
every team, operations, support, because you're going to have to make sure that your processes align with the existing processes, or if you need a new process, you're going to have to create one. Support is going to have a huge stake in community, so you're going to need to engage with them. Um, Gosh, I can keep going. It depends on the size of your org. If you're small, it's going to be a little simpler.
Yeah.
If you're large, it's going to be a lot.
I feel like one more team to work with that might not be super easy. Might be legal team when you're working in some huge
Oh,
company organization. You have to like
yeah.
run
If you
everything through them, and it's like,
So here's a tip with working with legal teams. And so I do have a background where like if I would go way back, like I worked for a community that was literally a city.
hmm.
And here's what I know about working with legal teams. If you engage with them early, you will be their best friend. Just straight up, just engage with legal, especially if you're doing any type of like giveaway, any type of some types of customer facing materials, like in the forms of like content need to go through legal. And it doesn't hurt to just say, hey, can you review this? Hey, does this look okay? Would you like any adjustments? Most of them are very fast. They'll get back to you in like 2 seconds. Just do it. Thank you for bringing that one up, though. That's a big one.
So also, usually it's a good way for community builders to go to teams and work with them and help them and encourage them to work with you. But how do you encourage people from other teams to work with a community team
Mhm.
without not just adding more tasks on their plates?
Yeah, and I think that's a really big one. And sometimes it's like we approach things from the standpoint that we're community, we have a lot of value, work with us, come along, and but truly you have to make sure that you have a compelling business case across all of those areas. So you have to understand what those teams' goals are and how you can work into it and come with an established point of view, right? You might be in an organization where they publish that. You might not. You might be in an organization where it's like you only have corporate OKRs that can be a little vague. You might be in one where they're very specific and they ladder down and it's pretty easy to figure out. But one of the biggest things is understanding like, is there an initiative that they're undertaking that's one of their biggest bets for the year? Okay, how can community help?
Hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be this huge lift, right? You just have to be able to analyze that situation and say, okay, I see that you are working on X. Community is working on Y. I think that there's a benefit here if we align some processes, and it might not even add that much. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But then once you prove success in that one area, does that give you some leverage next time to ask for a little more? Probably.
But it also sounds like a chicken egg problem, like what to
Always.
start with. Like
Yeah.
who does the first move? Like either you help us or we help you, like how to create this first business case. But yeah, it's definitely easier once you prove. But I feel like the hardest part is exactly to make it happen, without any proof.
Yeah, and that is hard. That is something, especially if your community is new, that you're going to run into, and especially depending on your business environment. A lot of people are going to expect you to have the proof or the data from the get-go proving that you can be of help, and that simply might not be possible. So what I would say there is we can, like go back to school a little bit, right? We've got studies, we've got reference materials, and so you write up your business case and you cite established papers or articles from some of the individuals and the companies that are doing some reporting on community. I mean, there's a huge movement for community ROI. I've definitely seen more about it in the last 6 months than I have. Period. Thanks, Yuri.
Finally, there is more and more and more information about community right. And I feel like, yeah, it's enough information out there. Just go there, find it, and you'll have a compelling case to share with people. But it's always up to research. It's always up to how deep people are ready to dig, but yeah, it's everywhere. It's not just in the community. So
Yeah.
how do you bring visibility to the overall community impact on business internally?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways that you can do that. One thing is just making sure you're socializing your programs, and that might need to be like depending on where you sit within community, that might need to be management or leadership or something like that. But making sure that you are constantly getting in front of people in a way that's profitable, right? Like we don't just do it to do it. We want to make sure that we're getting into the right spaces at the right times with the right thing to say, and that goes back to understanding those shared goals. But I think one of the things that can be really hard is that, once again, a lot of community tends to be a little bit startup-y, and to allow yourself to be insulated is not going to be helpful. So we look at things like, okay, well, I need to engage with this team. What events does that team have that I can work into? Or I know that, if sales is talking to customers, what can I give them that enable them to talk to customers about community and therefore close that loop and get everything going? Like, looking at what opportunities are available within your organization um, is helpful. Reporting out, oh my goodness. This goes back to that PMI project management stuff, right? Like, okay, how are you communicating with your stakeholders? How often are you completing status updates? Are you doing it on a cadence? Do they know to expect it? Is what you're creating valuable to all of them? Are you linking to the appropriate documentation? And if there's something that is starting to go off track, are you communicating that to the right people? Are you escalating at the right time? And are you providing a clear pathway to fix it or asking for help if needed?
From your perspective, what is a good way to report and communicate with people in the right time?
Mhm. So for me, I try to keep a steady cadence of communications. um, and just identifying which channels that could be, like if you have an internal messaging system like your Slack or your Teams or any number of things. I know there's a bunch of different ones. Making sure that you have those channels set up and maybe you report weekly. Here's what happened. Here's what's coming. And then a larger scale, you can maybe, especially if you're engaging with like the C-suite, you're not going to really want to put that on an internal messaging system. Like they might look, but for the most part, they're not going to. So then maybe we send out a greater email every other week or maybe once a month, whatever works for you. You can work into different standing processes. You can institute a monthly review and then you distribute that as well. There's all sorts of ways that you can make sure that you're getting in front of the right people. And I just think that consistency is really the best thing I can say. Now, also, if you're fortunate enough to have like an understanding of what events are coming, like large scale events, that would be another opportunity to get in front of the right people and explaining how community can help with that. But in general, I just think consistency is important.
And it's always nice to bring the good news, if something
Mhm.
happened, if you helped some teams and you got to work together on something and get
Oh,
great
yeah.
results. But community is not always a bright side. There is always a
Mhm.
dark side. So I'm curious, how do you talk about the challenges you face or if something went wrong in the community?
Yeah. So I guess it depends on how wrong it went, right? Are we
Yeah.
talking about we're not hitting our goals, or are we talking about somebody said something concerning on community? So I would say you need to have a plan for both, right? If it's an escalation of that type, something very serious with like larger scale implications to safety or health or something like that, you should have a process available and you should know if you need to engage with the security team, if you need to engage with potentially someone outside of the org. Like if it's serious enough, you might need to engage with law enforcement. Not that we have, like, I've never observed that, but it is a possibility, right? So the other thing I would say is if you are finding that your work is beginning to go off track, be transparent. Don't try to hide it. Um, I know that it's tempting to, try to fix it before people know what's happening. Um, but in my experience, the absolute best thing you can do is be clear. This is what is happening. Be very clear on the steps that you are currently taking. Be clear on when this will be functional, like whatever step that you're taking to remedy the issue. Be clear on when that's going to happen. Um, that has worked the best for me, and truly as a person, the people I admire the most are the ones who can deliver the hard things kindly and clearly, right? It just doesn't do you any good not to confront it. And the thing is, you will be surprised when you talk about those things or even put it in your updates, the people who may show up to help.
Hmm.
You never know. There's a lot of people who are supporting community, whether you know it or not, and it can be shocking to see how many people will pitch in with their expertise or ideas or things that you might not have considered. So transparency is your friend. Don't hide it. It feels weird the first time, Nobody wants to say, everybody wants to say, we're crushing all our goals and everybody gets a puppy, right? But it's not always the case.
And adding to a point, I feel like that even those community experts who are working with external community, like not community of inside the organization, it's still their part of their job is building the internal community because you
Oh,
still
yeah.
have to talk to all those people, sometimes connect them, sometimes um, ask someone to help someone else. So yeah, sorry, but you're building two communities, no matter what.
You are.
And sometimes challenges are like one time challenge. Something happened, okay, fixed it, whatever. But sometimes it's continuously happening. So how do you know when to pivot if something is going not in the right direction?
Yeah, and that goes back to that continuous, like I've talked about doing a monthly business review, that goes back to continuously looking at the data, checking to see like what is happening, is it effective, and how can we pivot? Now that's for like things that are driving your goals. But if an incident happens in community, there's a couple of things that you're going to need to look at. Is this a bug?
Hmm.
Full stop. It might be a bug. So you need to talk to like especially I don't know that there are many communities that are fully built within a company, right? Like you're probably going to have to engage with your external CSM or their team or submit a ticket, but it could be a bug. And if it's a
Mhm.
bug, okay, when's the date of resolution? You need to get that from the other company, or at least make sure that there's a path forward. It could be something that is ongoing. So that's where you need to perform some testing. You need to make sure that it's solved. And if it's ongoing or you can't find a resolution, that's when it's time to start communicating. I mean, and I would say even if there was an issue, like if your community site unexpectedly went down, yeah, your stakeholders should know about that. So it's still requiring the communication, but just making sure that you understand the timeline for the fix and that the next steps that need to be taken and with whom will get you a lot farther than anything else that I can think of, at least.
Yeah. Katie, I wish to have the sky as a limit, but time as a limit. So the final question. What is one small thing to do right away for someone who's struggling with identifying their community ROI?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a hard one. And I think it's very much subjective to the business that you are involved in. So, well, obviously, Yuri, the first step is to listen to this podcast. Good
Yay,
job,
finally!
everybody.
Woo!
No, and in all well, I am serious about that. But in getting back to being a professional, get really clear on those business goals. That's been the common thread in this conversation, right? Like, if you understand the investment that your company has made in community, you'll have a better idea of what you need to be communicating back. And it's not always obvious. It just sort of depends on the organization you belong to. You are going to have to do some math again. Sorry. It's just sometimes we have to eat our spinach, right? Like
It's all about
it's part of
math.
the job. Yeah. Um, and then just understanding what your individual organization is most interested in. Like if they're really pushing case deflection, okay, let's calculate how much do tickets cost this company? How can we help? And then how do we connect the dots to prove that we did it? So that's one that you might consider if your business is more interested in renewals. You will need to connect the dots as to how community is impacting renewals for whatever system you're using or whatever business you're in. If your company is really keen on events, you're going to want to show how did community show up at events, right? And that can be all different, right? Like, because I know when I did nonprofit, it was all events, right?
Oh.
And so that would be a great metric to track and a great way to show that that the return on investment is happening. So it really depends on what's most important to your business, but there's just different ways that you can break it down in a way that's digestible and that's easier. But it can also be really hard when you're like stepping into it. Like, what do I do? And that's where you just need to get really clear. What are those goals? How do I ladder up? And how do I show the impact across the business?
It sounds like good community experts has to have business background or some kind of a business education to really understand how it works, because otherwise, if you have no idea how it works, like how can, yeah, definitely you can ask ChatGPT, but
But you can learn, right? There's so many free resources. There's so many ways to learn this, and then you just have to apply it to your area.
totally. Last but not least, name two people I should reach out to talk about community ROI.
Yeah, I had to think about this because you've already had like so many cool people on this podcast. But if I were to pick two people who I am somewhat connected with or more connected with,
Hmm.
who I think would be really fascinating to learn from. First, Tiffany Oda. Her work has positively impacted mine, 100%. And I would love to hear what she has to say. And the other person who I am connected to, but I don't know particularly well, I should probably get to know her better. Marjorie Anderson.
Hmm.
Her work has been very interesting to me. I know her from a few other podcasts on community, not necessarily focused on ROI, but she really just seems to be a very interesting person who would have some insights that would be worth learning about.
And what is the best way to connect with you?
LinkedIn. It's probably
Always,
the
always
easiest
there.
way. That's always LinkedIn.
Got it, got it. Katie, thank you so much for this extremely valuable conversation and for sharing your experience so openly.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Yuri, for having me. It's been fun.
And yeah, see you in the community world. And thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions about how the community can help you reach and overcome your business goals faster, let's connect on LinkedIn and talk about it. That's it. We're done. See you in the next episode.